Chapter 3. The Right Road, or What's Left. The dry season. Silent Plains, 980 IH. The strong wind picked up sand grains, dry grass, and the occasional insect, threw them against Amanikaros's face. The dust storm out in this arid part of the Silent Plains did not, however, do anything to deflect the burning sun overhead. It just made the sand hurt more. Amani squinted through the scarf tied around his face at the outpost on the horizon. He was far out from the city of Thronefast, and unless the Queen was sparing no expense on his capture, they should not have made it out here with news of his treason. If anything good could be said for this wind, it afforded him the chance to hide behind his veil. The guards on the wooden walls were not wearing the king's colors as Amani walked through the gates. These were local guards, most likely the hired defenses of the region of the town. The walls were high enough to block some of the dust stirred up by the windstorm, and the town itself spread out before him. A large water well in the center of the town covered up for the duration of the storm. It was a mix of miners and traders, a few aristocrats meandering in the doorways of the dozen or so small stores and halls on the main thoroughfare. Amani adjusted his mask as he walked toward what appeared to be a tavern of sorts. His 3-day journey from the outskirts of Avendir's Pass was quickly paced, lacking in stops for real food. He had put as much space between himself and the city as he possibly could. If he just had time to think, he was sure that a solution would present itself. The slatted door creaked as he swung it open for a moment before quickly shutting it behind him to keep out the weather.
Fine day, stranger,
said the man behind the bar. He was a burly man. A large beard on his face ran down his oversized chest. His arms bulged on both sides of his thick frame. He looked more like a cage fighter than a barkeep.
Yes, quite nice weather you have here.
Amani replied, trying to act as normally as he could.
The kiln this town was built in must make for good business for a tavern like this.
Well, the more dirt I can throw in one's face, the more I can charge to wash it off, or wash it down, depending on how long one stays around. It's called job security.
Amani laughed along while looking for the answers to the man's subtle question about the stranger's intentions in town. This was a small enough place that this tavern owner probably knew everyone and their cousin the next town down the road. So he scrambled for more time to figure out his immediate plan.
Well, it's hard to fit through the gates if I eat as much as I feel like I should. I guess it will depend on how much food I can fit in my belly,
he said. The barkeep was already preparing him a cup of water and a beer. Amani figured it was the custom out here, so he took a second while the barkeep was pouring to look around the room. It was mid-afternoon, so he figured most were still out working wherever that is that people earned a living. A few of the townsfolk had settled in to ride out the wind. A lady in a very ornate blue dress sat in the corner with a much older man. Her father, maybe? Well, he thought, not holding hands like that. She must be mining him for his gold. A pair of larger men sat on the other side of the room, staring at their mugs, looking tired as if they had built a wall in a day. Their clothes were not dry and sand-covered, but seemed sooty, almost like they'd been digging holes in moist dirt. There was no wanted signs up anywhere in the main parlor, and no guards or soldiers. So he breathed in deep and blew out a fraction of his stress. He turned back around to the bar and pulled the scarf down to his neck.
Here you go, soldier.
Amani froze. The barkeep didn't seem like he was calculating or afraid. Was it just a colloquialism? Did he recognize him with his mask down now? All the stress that had just left his body came running back in.
Soldier, eh? I really look dapper enough?
Monty joked, trying to feel out his intentions now.
I just figured with the haircut and all, we get a few passing through here on their holiday, trying to get back to Mama's home cooking.
Monty learned years ago that when needing to lie for secrecy, telling mostly the truth is the best way to convince someone.
You know, I always wanted to be a soldier. I always had an affection for their service.
Monty smiled as he spoke to the barkeeper, as charmingly as he could.
But this haircut is about as close as I would like to be to one nowadays. It's a little late for me now.
You're not that old.
The barkeep chimed in, none the wiser.
Sure, you're no bright-eyed youth, but you look strong enough, in decent shape. Never give up on your dreams, until your wife tells you to, at least.
Amani raised his glass to that and guzzled down the cup full of water. He felt the sand grains loosen up from the sides of his throat as he emptied the cup.
Looks like you've been out here for a while. Where are you coming from?
Thrown fast. I was trying to shave some time off my travels to have more for my holiday. It's a lot tougher out there than I had anticipated.
It always is.
As the barkeep walked off, Amani's thoughts began to clear. He hadn't taken time to assess his position to formulate a proper battle plan. The crown wants him captured or dead. And he knows it has to do with the grotesque things going on beneath the streets of Thronefast. All he's ever known is how to be a good soldier. That life seems to be burned up like so much hay with no livestock to eat it. He has no friends, no family, hardly any money, and no source of income. If he worked for some out-of-the-way town like this as a guard, it would only be a matter of time before he gained notoriety and was spotted by someone who knew of him. He couldn't bring himself to work for more sinister parties where his anonymity could still be upheld. But beyond all the present troubles, the one that sat hardest on his chest was the betrayal he felt from the crown he had been loyal to his entire life. Someone else's misdeeds have ruined his life, all because he found out about it. And the shining example of virtue that he held the crown to stand for was now tainted with devious aura about it. He protected this lie. He believed it. He killed for it. How many lives had he taken for virtue's sake, believing he was on the side of right? And if that wasn't right, then where was true virtue to be found?
Hey, stranger.
The barkeep looked over at him.
Something bothering you? Looks like you're staring miles down into that beer. Say, what's your name?
Name's Devin. Devin Wellstead.
Imani said. He wished he had spent more time on a cover story. Devin Wellstead.
Well met, Devin. I'm Daniel Braithing. Welcome to the Burrows Den.
The barkeep said. He walked over opposite the bar from Devin, sensing that there was a sadness about him.
You know, it's not anyone's business to know the affairs of a man, except maybe his tender. You look like you may need some advice.
Imani. For whatever reason, fate, insecurity, loneliness. He felt as if this barkeep could at least help relieve him of some of his stress by being a friendly ear. The only problem was he knew he couldn't share anything, no matter how much he wanted to.
Woman trouble? Family issues? There's plenty of both to go around, that's for sure. I remember one time my nephew Coben...
I'm lost. I'm lost for my purpose, my road. Not in a literal sense. I've recently met a divergence in my plans and reality that may never be corrected. And I feel my purpose has been stripped from me.
Ah, see.
Daniel grabbed at his chin.
So much deeper than a lover's tiff.
He looked away for a moment, trying to find the right words.
You know, a man's purpose can't be taken away by another, just as this cup cannot lose its cupness. Folks may refuse to use it, store it in a cupboard, but until it's destroyed and unfit to do things cups do, its purpose resides in it.
Grabbed the water cup Imani had drained and began washing it.
Now, I assume he can misplace his purpose, but it'd be like anything else a man loses. He set it down somewhere and forgot where he left it. My advice to you, lad, is to find the place that your purpose resides, where you keep it, and go there and see if you can't find it.
Imani listened intently. He had many mentors over the course of his life, never having a father of his own. He learned along the way how to listen, eat the meat of what was said, spit out the bones. And something this man was saying resonated with him.
Go back to where my heart drew its purpose.
Only you know where that is.
And if I can't find my purpose there again?
Daniel paused for a moment and then smiled. He walked over to Imani with the same water cup in his hand and set it down in front of him.
That'll be 12 copper pieces,
he said, nudging the cup toward him. Marti dropped some coins into the cup. He grinned slightly, realizing what the barkeep was doing.
You're pretty good at your job, sir. I need a room for one night and a week's rations for the morning.
Yes, sir, as you wish,
Daniel said, still smiling. A man charged through the back door behind the counter, carrying boxes of supplies, and dropped them down heavily onto the bar.
Hey, boss.
Daniel turned to the man.
I was just serving our new customer here.
Thank you, sir.
The man said, beginning to empty the boxes.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything else I could do for the family?
Wait, you're not the barkeep?
He looked over at Daniel, who was just shrugging in the corner, helping put the goods away.
Oh, no, sir. Thomas Brow, proprietor of the Rusty Pick, at your service. This is our esteemed noble, Lord Barathine. His family settled in this town. Best man you'll ever meet. Knighted by the king. Rest in peace, of course.
Marti smiled again, chuckled to himself.
Well met, Mr. Browse.
He turned back to Daniel and joked.
I'm still expecting those rations, barkeep.
The wet season. Silent Plains. 525 IH.
Up there, ahead.
Cater yelled over the sound of the pounding rain. The thick red mud made each step slippery and tacky at the same time. The rainy season in this arid part of the plains was a miserable time. When it wasn't hot and dry, it was drowning in torrential downpours. Cater's woolen hood was soaked and no longer offering any reprieve from the rain. Val, tasked by what she saw was gods, was right behind him, faring slightly better. Her cloak was made of a light, supple leather and afforded some resistance to the rain, but everything else on her was soaked. There was no place in this flat, deserted land that offered any shelter. There were some mesas here and there, but mostly just flat plains as far as the eye could see, which in this case was not very far at all. Cater trudged on, scanning the horizon for any signs of relief. They had been walking in this rain for half a day. It was clear when they had set out for the caves. The Old One had described to them the general location of a relic that had to be found and guarded by the leadership of the Red Raven assassins. They acted as his hands and feet in their time to protect the world from itself, rescuing nations from making catastrophic decisions. Knowing the future and past is one thing. Affecting the future and past simultaneously is altogether different. The Old One really could do what he said. His timeless state at least wasn't wasted. He had already effected great change with the help of Cole, Cater's father. Cole had sacrificed his own life to keep the knowledge of the Dragon King's magic from falling into the hands of men. Cater wasn't sure if a righteous cause or a vendetta for the life that was stolen from Cole by King Avendir that led him to do what he did. He did know one thing. He would never sacrifice his life for anything or anyone else. Even running these errands for this magical vision of some old man was partly based on his prophecy of getting his desires of home and family, the two things he missed out on most of his life. The rain let up slightly as some quick bursts of light made their way through the patchy clouds overhead. In the distance, Cater caught a glint, something shiny. He raised his hand and pointed as he turned halfway around, but not stopping.
Up ahead.
Cater said loudly. The rain was still making a lot of noise in every direction.
I follow.
It was several miles of flat terrain, and it seemed like forever before they arrived at what had been glinting in the intermittent sunlight. It was back to raining as Cater and Val marched up to the stack of shiny metal tools at the entrance of a large hole in the earth. It appeared to gently slope downward, as a snake's den would appear. The opening was as wide as a carriage, and a semblance of steps were dug into the loose clay mud. Several cubits down was a large puddle, a trap for any rain making its way into the cavern's mouth. Cater didn't ask for any advice, jumping straight into the opening to get out of the rain. Overhead, Cater noticed the rock outcroppings. It was mud up top, but beneath the surface it appeared to be dense rock. Cater stepped around the deepest portion of the water trap in the entrance and slid his way across the berm to the other side. The rain had not made it into the tunnel, but the echo from the splashing outside reverberated through the darkness in front of him. He took a moment to strip his cloak and hung it off a sharp rock jutting out of the side of the tunnel's wall. Val was moving through the center of the pool, disregarding the water. Val noticed Cater's cloak hanging in the cavern, but did not remove hers. Cater noticed her look at his, and he wondered if she gave any thought to the comfortability of clothing or whether orcs just didn't care. Maybe the cloak had special meaning to her. He wasn't sure, but he knew that he would be miserable walking around in that cloak and hood when you could be drying out.
We could use some light down here, if we're to find a spot further in to rest.
Cater thought out loud. He looked over at Val, who was standing beside him, waiting.
Could you...
Val looked past him, not paying any attention to his cues.
Could you, do your thing?
Val looked at him, irritated.
The thing. Whoosh.
Cater held up his hand and made swooshing sounds around with his other hand around it. Val understood what he said. She wasn't about to cater to this pitiful man who couldn't see in the dark.
What you like? I make fire for you?
Well, I just figured, it's easy for you. You know what? Never mind.
Cater said, feeling ridiculous standing here being mocked by an orc. He pulled a leather sack from his pack and poured the contents into a cup with a glass lid and a wick fixed to the lid. The makeshift lamp he put down on the floor as he retrieved the lighter kit. After a moment, he pulled it out of his pack and retrieved the elements. Val, watching him the entire time, leaned over and summoned fire from her fingers and lit the wick. Cater froze, immediately annoyed. Fantastic. An orc with a sense of humor. Just what he was missing, he thought to himself.
You're too slow,
Val said as she pushed by him, still wearing her annoyed expression. Cater threw his kit back into the pack in protest and picked up the lamp. Val didn't seem to need it as she traveled ahead deeper into the cave. Getting farther away from the entrance, both began to hear faint sounds from inside the cave, yelling and some kind of cracking sound. Val kept her hand on her dagger as she moved through the twisting turns of the tunnel. Looking around, it was obvious that this wasn't all natural. It wasn't all fashioned. More of a expanded track that followed a natural opening. It meandered like a slow river at a slight downward grade, getting cooler as it continued down. The voices were getting louder with each bend, until you could make out 3 distinct voices. Val recognized the language.
Dwarves.
Val whispered over her shoulder. She began retrieving her dagger from its sheath.
Whoa.
Cater whispered back, blocking her arm from pulling it out.
Maybe you should let me lead now. How about that?
He pushed himself in front of her.
Trying to get everyone killed all the time. Oh, God.
The tunnel widened after one sharp turn, and the downward grade increased. In front of Cater was a large cave, 30 cubits across, and the bottom was still hidden from view. The room was lit by some fire down below the tunnel, and it made the whole cave glow a dull amber color. But something else was glowing much brighter. There were veins of some mineral. It was reflecting in the light source much more brilliantly than just the cavern walls. Cater stepped closer to the drop-off, looking down, so not to come into full view of whoever was in the cave. He finally saw a fire built on the floor of the cavern and immediately slid up against the wall of the tunnel. The voices were loud now, but he did not understand what they were saying. He looked back at Val, who was walking behind him with her hand still on her dagger. He motioned to her to get against the other wall and listen. Val braced herself up against the opposite tunnel wall and leaned forward to get as much sound as she could without being in view. Her dwarven language was not the best, but she could make out most of it.
So I says to the girl, How can it be that one's skin is so radiantly blue as ice and can still melt my heart at the same time? You use that on a girl? Where did you pick up such a ridiculous line? My mother used to tell me that.
Then there was a great deal of laughing. Val slid back over beside Cater and whispered something to him.
They say nothing important.
Well, are they dangerous? Go listen.
He was more frustrated that he knew less about the allies of men than their enemy does. Val went back to the side. She crouched low to the ground and leaned farther in.
Ah, Zolan, you are very terrible with the ladies. Yes, and your face doesn't help. Hey, I am not too bad looking. Yes, with a bag over your head. Now that's probably something his mother said.
And the laughing resumed. Val stood back up and made her way again to Cater's side.
Well?
Cater said in a very serious tone.
They are.
Val tried thinking of the right words.
Yeah?
Stupid.
Cater hung his head. This had to be the worst reconnaissance ever conducted, he thought to himself. Val obviously thought they were no threat, but he still wanted to proceed with caution. He looked down at Val and motioned with his hand for them to climb down to the entrance and stay to the back wall. Val led the way, her long arms dropping her body slowly from one outcropping to the next. The floor of the cavern was only about 2 heights of a man. It was very hard rock that did not give easily. She made it down without any gravel breaking loose from the walls. She walked carefully against the farthest wall away from the blue-hued dwarves, never making a sound. Cater watched as the dwarves mined a vein, their backs to them. He waited to get the cadence of their swings and leapt from the entrance of the cavern floor all at once, landing as a pick met stone. His leather soles did in his arrival, and he slunk over beside Val. The cavern was lit by a small fire from which twinkles of light bounced off the shiny ore mixed in the slurry that formed the walls. It almost appeared as if they were surrounded by stars in the poorly lit room. It was very hard for Cater to get his eyes adjusted to the relative darkness, with a glowing fire between him and the strangers. But if he couldn't see them well, it should be the same in reverse. He motioned for Val to take it easy as he took a step forward and opened his mouth.
Excuse me, friends.
Cater let out, the sound echoing around the room. Cater saw 3 dwarfs spin in an instant, quickly turning their banter into low roars. One dwarf flailed his arms from what Cater could tell, and before he could focus, the pick the dwarf had been using some 20 cubits away sped past his face and stuck in the side of the wall beside him, sticking so hard he could hear the hum of the vibration in the handle. Val drew her dagger, making no sound. Her other hand began glowing with an amber aura. She crouched low and began strafing around the back of the cave.
Wait!
Cater yelled, throwing his hands toward the dwarves. He had to de-escalate this. There was no reason to fight if there was no reason to fight. At least he wanted a reason.
Do you speak Demithian?
Cater pleaded, hoping one of them did.
Yes, I do.
Replied the one who had thrown his pick and already replaced it with a sword in his hand. He never dropped his guard, but clustered the 3 of them together. Weapons out, ready to settle their dispute either way.
I am Cador, of the small village of Southridge in the plains, far to the east of here.
He said, waving furiously at Val to stop moving and wait. Val saw him out of the corner of her eye, but she was noticeably less trusting of dialogue and more interested in controlling the problem.
This is my partner Val. We have been traveling for a couple days and only sought refuge from the storm in here. Nothing more.
He was hoping they were not outlaws fleeing from something or someone, like was often the case with wandering migrants. The 3 dwarves whispered to each other, not moving for a moment. They were slightly shorter than him, being particularly short for a human, and they looked about as thick as him, although he couldn't imagine them being as agile. They would be formidable if this came to a fight, Cater thought. And then one spoke up.
Then tell your friend to return to you. and we may talk a little, yes?
Cater looked over at Val. He knew she heard. He didn't need to repeat it, but he wasn't sure how she would respond to the request. Val did not move, watching them, the small flames licking off her hand. Cater saw her unease. Val had not been in many altercations with other races that were not decided with bloodshed. It seemed to be the way of life she was meant to know. Why should hers be any different than her kin who spilled their blood at the hands of anyone who would come against them, even each other? The male population of orcs lived to fight, completely devoted to clan and their own reputations to their death. They were not calculating, not conniving, just single-minded in pursuit of the respect in life or death. It made them dangerous and foolish. Female orcs were different, very calculating, making them the natural leaders of the population. As much as males chased respect, the females chased honor, to be the best, the most vicious, or the most cunning, but always aware that death holds less honor than a later victory, often sending males to do their bidding to keep themselves safe just in case things didn't work out in their favor. Val had not had the luxury of an army of male orcs to do her bidding, so her judgments in battle meant much more than they otherwise would for her own safety. She had been blessed with a rather high intelligence, and she was aware of this, seeing most other female orcs as inferior to her. The only orcs that were close to her were the other Karooks, but she still felt she was the most cunning of all she had met. Her living the life of an outcast gave her a sense of tension any time she felt she didn't have the upper hand in a situation, and backing down in a room with strangers as an orc was nothing she would ever consider doing.
Val? Look, I have this. Just come over here.
I do not trust these blue mans, these dwarves,
She said, not minding her volume. She did not care if they heard.
Your friend has quite the accent, yes?
The dwarf said. They could not see her face across the poorly lit room with her hood down low over her face.
I am not familiar with such an accent.
Cater immediately put it all together. Val had not lowered her hood once since she had been in the cave out of the rain. She must live her whole life hiding her identity, he thought. He thought about her constantly needing to be on guard, hated by her own and most everyone else. He had never thought about how her life had been on her own, and the interactions he took for granted in his day-to-day living.
Yes, yes, she is from a different town, very, very remote. It is a small group of humans from our home world. But she is fine, just jittery when meeting new people is all. Let me just go over by her.
Cater slid over near her and whispered,
I have not hurt you in any way, have I? You can trust me, Val. I won't tell them you are orc. We will be fine. I just need you to lower your weapon.
Cater glanced back and forth between the three dwarves, and her eyes recessed into the darkness of her hooded cloak. His eyes pleaded with hers, and he just hoped she could read his emotions. Val did not move. Her instinct was never to let her guard down until she controlled the situation. Trust was something she knew nothing about. She grunted quietly, but loud enough to where Cater could hear her, and she shook her head lightly in protest. Cater regained focus of the antsy dwarves and did the only thing he knew to do to keep this from escalating. He stepped in front of Val with his back to her and spoke to the dwarves.
Forgive my friend. She's not as trusting as I am, but I know you three are stand-up lads, loyal to the ways of Kazis, am I right? Long live Father Kazis, yeah? Yeah?
The three dwarves shot glances back and forth at each other, and then out of nowhere, they dropped their guard.
This one must be stupid.
One of them said, starting to chuckle.
We do not treat Father Kazas as you would a mere mortal king such as you, human. Father Kazas lives forever, as he has done since before the god Var. Tell your friend she has no need to fear us. We are brothers from Kadasa. moved here to search for treasures to take back to our homes. We are adventuring in the plains when we found this cave. This was 3 days ago.
Val wasn't sure what to do. She had never traveled with a human. It appeared they got special treatment when engaging with other strangers, courtesies she was never afforded. She saw Cater's hand waving her down behind his back. Reluctantly, she slowly let down her weapon, but kept it in her hand.
We are adventuring as well. We have been sent on behalf of our employer to find a certain giant that wanders this way. He's known to have a cave in this area. You wouldn't happen to know anything about this, would you?
Yes.
The third dwarf finally spoke up.
We found some tools down a corridor there that looked to be for giants. He must crawl through the tunnel to get here. There was also some pelts and some berries.
What berries?
And Val spoke up for the first time. Cater noticed immediately that she had tried to hide her noticeably gravelly voice and sound more human-like. She was still doing her best to hide her identity. That was probably smart, even now.
Well, they appeared to be medicinal. Most were crushed up, but some were still there. They were light blue, almost like the color of Zadok there.
He said, pointing to the dwarf to the right.
Most unusual. Large berries with 4 clustered together.
Val whispered to Cater, still in front of her.
I know this berry. It grow in Vrona mountain and make the skin fix.
Cater looked back and saw her cupping her side as if to nurse a wound. Was the giant hurt and looking for supplies? The old one had sent them to get an artifact from the giant who was said to be holding it. He did not say what it was, just that the giant would know when they mentioned it, and that he would most likely not attack them. The giants that roam the plains and the mountains were not aggressive, as Cater had been told. They liked to keep to themselves, and were often aggravated when bothered, sometimes enraged if not handled carefully.
You lads have helped us a great deal. Thank you.
Cater said, still trying to keep everyone civil.
There is one more thing I would ask, if I could be so bold.
Val laid awake on a bed of large pelts that had been procured by Cater and set up for her near the entrance of the cave. The rain and wind had finally ceased, and she had no intention of staying down in the cave with strangers. Cater had set up a place for her to rest near the exit, and he had set up a place to sleep between her and the dwarves whose snoring filled the cavern and tunnels. She most likely would not sleep, but having Cater between her and them did give her some ease. It was a feeling she was not used to having, if ever. She guessed the closest thing would be when she was a child as a student to the last Usharuk. She knew she was safe whenever she was in the sacred place in the mountain. It was the last time she knew peace, before the humans invaded their lands, before the never-ending war. Cater laid in his bed, thinking of the life that Val had lived. She grew up depending on herself for everything, not having anyone to lean on, to trust. They had more in common than he would have guessed, but he could not relate to being in a land where you were hunted and distressed merely by your looks, even without his home and people who cared for him. He never lived under constant fear. It would take a strong person to take that kind of treatment and survive for 50 years or so. That's pretty remarkable, he thought. The Roan Mountains were another 4 days north. Then Val had said the place where the special flowers grew was high in the mountains, near an altar that was sacred to giants. She had been taken there during her training as a child, and offered an offering to the ancestors of the giants to help keep peace between the orc and the giants. It was one of the only long-lasting truces the orc had kept near their homeland. They had no need for giant land, as the giants had no interest in theirs. Leaving the plains, the place he called home for years, made him realize how disconnected from this place his life had become. He had a home here, twice, and both times it had been taken away inauspiciously, through no fault of his own. He did not care if he came back. He was on a new path now. He just hoped it was the right one. He lay down to the sound of distant snoring dwarves on one side, with a magic-wielding orc warrior at the other end. and against his better judgment, fell asleep in the dark underground tunnel.